and welcome back to Global News Today here at Arabiya English. I'm your host, Michael Prendergast. And coming up in today's show, I'll be joined by the Republican strategist, Amanda Makki, for a political roundup live from Washington, D.C. But first, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the one and only Kevin O'Leary, the Shark Tank star, Mr. Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us again, Kevin. Obviously, I have to start at what Trump has called his big, beautiful bill, a new landmark tax bill for the US. I'd love to hear your take on the affairs.
Well, it's still over an increase to the deficit of $3 trillion. So it's going to get a lot of pushback in the next phase of negotiations because there's a lot of fiscal hawks in the US that don't approve of this bill conceptually because there's not enough cutting of spending. And so we're at the beginning of a process. I don't anticipate this will become law until sometime in July or August. So there's a tremendous amount of negotiation to go on now. You've really got a lot of debate about when does the U.S. balance its budget? And we just had recent downgrade of Moody's on the Treasury, which is putting pressure on rates on both the short and long end. So it's not over yet. It's the beginning of something, but I would say it's really only in the second inning.
One thing that stood out to me is the national debt of the US. It's going to balloon up to $3.3 trillion over the next 10 years. What are the implications of this? Debate.
That's what's going to happen here. There's a fraction within the Republican Party that is not on board for this increase. And how to satiate those individuals so that they get on board for the final passage of this into law sometime in July or August, that's going to be what everybody's going to be watching. This is really sausage being made. You're actually seeing this occur because you've got a debt ceiling issue. You've got a lot of members that are not interested in increasing the deficit. You've got people within the administration that want to see a balanced budget, a cut in spending. It's raucous, to say the least. And so this is the beginning. And the fact that it got through the vote last night, that's great. But again, I don't know what it's going to look like by the time it gets to the end game, and nobody does.
And in terms of clean energy tax credits have been hit as well. Trump is doing what he said he was going to do, and that's drill, baby, drill.
Yes, that's true. But what's really going on with the drill, baby drill and Doug Burgum as the energy czar is the idea of deregulation, about allowing access to federal lands, about changing the policy on pipelines coming out of Canada, all kinds of new initiatives to export LNG, natural gas, compressed gas. I mean, all of this is happening at the same time towards getting the U.S. energy independent. And that's not really affecting the budget too much. It is affecting the optimism around the idea that there won't be an energy debate. But even on that score, there's quite a bit of concern that right now Trump has to choose between two factions. Does he keep households with low-cost energy and starve off industry growth? Or does he do the reverse? Does he give the power to it? Because right now the grid in the United States is tapped out. You can't get another gigawatt anywhere. And so the initiative now is what other sources of energy can they get? And that's why they're focusing so much on stranded natural gas in states like North Dakota, Virginia, West Virginia, Louisiana, Kentucky. I mean, they're looking for every drop of energy they can find. They're going to need turbines to convert this into electricity, but there's a crisis emerging on energy, and it's not really reflected in the budget because we haven't got to that place yet, but Burgum is sounding the warning cry right now about this, and I don't think it's going to land on a deaf ear with the president.
And turning to China, one thing that has definitely not fallen on deaf ears is tariffs. He has said many times again, it's a beautiful word. You yourself said retailers should not be expected to eat the tariffs. What do you mean by that?
Well, the president has been putting pressure on Walmart specifically when they came out saying, wait a second, maybe a third of our products are somehow sourced or components are sourced in China. And those prices going up will be passed through to consumers. So prices will go up. It'll be inflationary on prices. And he pushed back and said, no, you should eat it. Unfortunately, he can say that, but most businesses aren't going to eat it. They're just not going to do that. They may take some of the margin, but they're going to pass these prices on. And none of this has happened yet. You haven't seen this yet in any of the data because we basically have a pause in these tariffs. But by the time the 90 days is over, these prices will probably reflect a higher price point because of input costs. I mean, at the end of the day, this is very, very simple. These tariffs are no different than the price of sugar going up or coffee or cinnamon going into a carrot cake. It's going to be inflationary. And that's what Trump is trying to avoid, because the last thing he can afford now is to have energy prices spike on consumers or to have eggs and butter and milk skyrocket because of tariffs in some way, or any kind of toy, for example. He's even spoken about that because the midterm elections are coming up. So Trump is in a tight space here. He wants to put tariffs on, but he can't stop prices from going up. So we're in an interesting, delicate narrative right now. And that's why he paused the tariffs to see if he could work out a deal with China on a reciprocal basis, maybe at 10%. That probably can be absorbed a lot easier than 25, 30, 40, or right now 145%.
Yes, of course, and one of your contemporaries, Ray Dalio, has been raising the alarm over China, saying Trump, he must negotiate in a very tough manner with China. Do you share this view?
I do, because it's not just about tariffs. It's about IP theft, access to their markets on a reciprocal basis, access to their legal system to resolve trade disputes, which we don't have. Issues like TikTok. There's no American social media product that is spyware in China. And so we have all of these issues boiling up on the China front, which are completely different than the negotiations going on in places like India, Japan, the EU, or England, Canada, or Mexico. They're all different. So you've got a lot of these different pain points happening at the same time. No administration's tried to resolve 60 trade deals at once, and Trump is trying to do that. And that's why there's a fair amount of skepticism, particularly from political rivals, but also the market itself. Now, the fact that there is some kind of rationale, and the Chinese have come to the table in Geneva, brought a lot of hope back into financial markets and services. And it's now really, you have to watch two markets, the debt markets and the equity markets, and they kind of trade off each other. And every day, if there's another tweet out of Trump, it can produce instability in those markets. So it's a rather interesting time, and there's volatility, that's for sure.
Speaking of volatility, alarm bells, they seem to be ringing in Europe at the moment. BYD, the Chinese EV firm, has overtaken Tesla in Europe for the first time. What do you make of that?
Competition exists amongst electric vehicles. I'm sure Elon Musk is watching this. It's a price point issue as well. The Chinese have an advantage in producing batteries. One of their companies just went public on Hong Kong and got a huge market cap. Batteries are essential. It's a massive component of EV. And the Chinese government at any time, if they wish, can subsidize to gain market share, which they do. And that's one of the complaints that various markets have, including Europe, the dumping of product at lower prices. And those are issues that should have been resolved in the World Trade Organization starting back in 2000 when China joined. And it's one of the big issues that is being debated in the US and in Europe about China. They don't comply with the World Trade Organization. So whether this market share gain is because of dumping or whether it's because the product is superior or a combination of both, you don't really know right now. But I'm sure Tesla will be competitive, but the game is on because it's not just electric cars, it's autonomous driving that's at stake here. And that's why people are concerned about theft, IP theft in China. All of this technology, much of it find its roots in American code or European code or German code. And the Chinese just ripped it off and then developed from there. And so that's got to stop as well.
Moving to Canada, Mark Carney has pulled off a pretty miraculous victory against all odds there. We know they're facing some pretty huge economic challenges. What did you make of his victory, and how much do you think Trump has played a part?
Carney was very successful in playing the fear of Trump that occurred in Canada during the the Trump suggesting that Canada should be purchased by the United States. That was very unpopular in Canada. Carney basically said, look, don't look at our party's track record. We know we've put Canada into an economic coma. We have lost on every market share across the G20. We have no GDP growth anymore. Per capita debt is the highest ever. And of course, 25% of the population of Canada is now at the poverty line. The party was a disaster under the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and he got kicked out by his own party. He was replaced by Carney. But Carney was very smart in using Trump as the fulcrum, the leverage, to put fear into Canadian hearts and get himself elected. Unfortunately, he did not win a majority mandate. Parliamentary history in Australia, England, Canada, if you don't win a majority mandate on your first go round in the parliamentary system, it's not a great outcome. 12 to 18 months is usually another election. And that's probably what Carney faces if he doesn't turn the economy around. Now, on the other hand, it couldn't be worse. It'd be very hard to make it worse. So everything he does now could be better. He's got to try and figure out how to get people to reinvest in Canada. Nobody wants to do that anymore. There's a bill in Canada called C-69, which is a no pipeline bill, no environmental projects bill, no mining bill, no anything bill. And so as a result, no money comes to Canada anymore. And the Canadian dollar collapsed almost 40% during the 10 years that the Liberals were in power, or at least under Justin Trudeau. So everything's in the worst place it's ever been. And so from there, he could be successful in building it back. Everybody's willing to give him a chance. He's not as stupid as I hate to say those words, but it's true. Trudeau is an idiot and Carney is not. And so hopefully the idiot king is gone, replaced by somebody who has a better track record. And now it's all up to him. Can he do anything? He's got 18 months. If he doesn't deliver, the Canadians will kick him out and hire somebody else.
Would they hire you? Would you like to see a run as Prime Minister in Canada?
I gave that a shot back in 2016. I don't think I want to go through that again. I admire anybody, including Carney, who goes in the process of serving the public into politics. It's a nasty business. My hands are full with the other projects I'm working on globally. I'm very happy with all of the various investments I'm making, including in the UAE, which I'm very excited about. And, it's sort of, it's great to have done it, but no thanks.
Noted, Kevin. So to move on to the record surge of Bitcoin, is this a sign of strength of crypto or a weakness in traditional finance?
The reason this is occurring, in my view, is that I don't know if you're watching what's happened in the last 48 hours, the advancement of what's called the Genius Act in the United States, which was the old Stablecoin Act. This passed the Senate with 66 votes 48 hours ago and is now being debated on the House floor. Elizabeth Warren is very much against it, but even last night they picked up 6 more advocates, 6 more representatives that are now not listening to her. I mean, she's gone into a rant saying that the Stablecoin Act or the Genius Bill is actually going to enrich the Trump family, which has nothing to do with Trump at all. It's about digital payment systems, but it's a good way for her to try and stop the act because she has an unusual case of Trump derangement syndrome, and that is making her vision a little cloudy right now. And other people have the same syndrome, but you have to avoid the noise with Trump. You have to look at the signal, and it looks right now that the administration is going to pass this Stablecoin Act, which will allow the U.S. currency to become a form of digital payment system globally, which is a good thing for the U.S. dollar in the view of most senators and representatives. And so if this passes, and the reason it affected Bitcoin is it leads to the next bill, which is called the Markets Structure Act. And the Structure Act determines whether Bitcoin is a commodity or a security. And once that's decided, institutional wealth and sovereign wealth can now go into Bitcoin and allocate it as an asset. And that is very, very positive for price discovery on Bitcoin. And as a result, the coin has moved past $100,000 in value. And there's a fair amount of interest in it because if they anticipate that the Stablecoin Act will pass and that eventually both the House and Senate will look at the Market Structure Act and determine what Bitcoin is as an asset, and it will become an alternative asset class for institutional investing.
And how do you respond to the likes of Warren Buffett, who said, obviously, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value? Obviously, there's a lot of the traditional investors. Are they being left behind in the past?
Well, Jamie Dimon has the same view. There are many who don't agree, and they are certainly entitled to their opinion. But clearly, there's a market for Bitcoin. It's a volatile asset, and had you invested in it 24 months ago, it was probably one of the best performing assets you could have invested in vis-a-vis the US dollar or any other currency. So while I respect Warren's view, and certainly Jamie Dimon is a successful executive in the money center banking industry, the market doesn't care, and they'll make their own decisions and they'll take their own risks. Everybody has an opinion, and that's how markets are made, and that's absolutely fair. But I think the market has spoken on Bitcoin. I think it's here to stay.
With US debt being downgraded and inflation cooling, is Bitcoin finally acting like digital gold?
That's speculation that many are making, that there's only 21 million eventually Bitcoin, a piece of information on scarcity, and therefore there's no government that can print any more of it. That's not the case for any currency like the US dollar or any other currency for that matter. So on that aspect, maybe it's attractive, and some people are big believers in that. We'll see, but it just, at the end of the day, I think what will have more impact on the dollar is the passage of the Stablecoin Act, because in order to issue a stablecoin, you have to back it with treasuries shorter than 92-day duration. So demand for treasuries is going to be huge. In fact, right now, the stats show that Tether, another stablecoin, USDC is the two that are big, USDC and Tether, has more treasury holdings than Germany does, US Treasury holdings. So you can see that the trend towards digitization of the American currency will really increase demand for treasury itself, treasury bills. Very interesting development in digital currency.
I wonder how much of this Bitcoin rally is tied to the US-China trade de-escalation. How fragile is that link?
It's not clear that it's tied to any one thing. For quite a while, it was tied to the NASDAQ and tech, but it seems to have decoupled from that. Now the concern is around the printing of American money, American dollars, to pay back debt and interest. And so if you're concerned about that, and there's an unlimited supply of money you can print, you may want to take a position in Bitcoin, because it's not something that's unlimited. It has scarcity. And that seems to be what's driving its latest price appreciation.
With Trump and yourself, obviously, you're pushing for crypto regulation. This is really the future of crypto. When it becomes a stable coin, then you're going to see, obviously, governments, all sorts of financial institutions putting billions and billions of dollars, as Trump, he likes to say. Do you think, or what is the ceiling at which the price of Bitcoin might reach?
Anybody's guess. There's another conference coming up in Las Vegas shortly. There was a lot of speculation it would be at 100,000 by then. In fact, it is past that. Nobody really knows about the demand metrics at any one time. One thing is certain, though, about the price of Bitcoin: it's volatile. And so if you're going to own it in a portfolio, you probably need diversification, because the volatility in Bitcoin is, in some ways, more volatile than any other market. And so I think it will remain highly volatile until the institutional investor is allowed to allocate to it, because institutional investors put generally a 1% to 5% weighting in any one asset class, and they hold those positions often for extremely long periods of time. And so when they come into the market, they'll be buying and selling and making markets for Bitcoin that don't exist today. And I think that's when things stabilize for Bitcoin. And I think we're a little ways off, maybe a year or two. But I know that if the Stablecoin Act passes, I, along with many others, will be working on clearing the Market Structure Act that will determine Bitcoin's place in the institutional cap table.
And speaking of asset classes, ETFs, what does Coinbase joining the S&P 500 say about crypto's mainstream legitimacy?
Well, I'm a shareholder of Coinbase, and I'm a shareholder of Robinhood, and I was a shareholder of WonderFi, which was just acquired, or at least the announcement pending regulatory approval happened last week. I'm a believer that you should own the infrastructure, and these are the places for price discovery. They're exchanges. In the case of Robinhood, a full broker dealer, so you can actually hold securities, ETFs, Robinhood stock, and crypto, all in the same platform. So there's a lot of digitization is occurring, a lot of excitement about this, but the fact that Coinbase has made it into the index is a reaffirmation that crypto will eventually, in my view, it's my opinion, will become the 12th sector of the S&P. It's got too much productivity associated with it, and I think cost reduction and opportunity on chain and a lot of other attributes that are interesting. And the fact that institutional investors are willing to own the picks and shovels through ownership of Robinhood and Coinbase just gives you that idea of how much farther we've come in just the last 4 years.
I've got time for just one more short question. I can't have Mr. Wonderful on the show and to not ask, obviously, for people who don't know, he probably is or has one of the finest watch collections in the world. What's on your wrist today, Kevin? Well,
funny you should ask that, because I have on my left wrist, New York time, a classic Rolex Steel Daytona, issued in 2015, discontinued in 2019, so it's a vintage. But on my, sorry, that was my left. My left hand has New York time. On my right, this is a Siddiqui watch. It was, I got just a couple of weeks ago when I met with the Siddiqui family. As you know, Siddiqui is one of the most important dealers in the world. But Siddiqui's done something else. Because they support horology, and even Hind Siddiqui, who has Watch Week in Dubai coming up in November, the watch collectors like me understand Siddiqui brings new watchmakers into the world by showcasing them, and they often bring them there first. But the Siddiqui family themselves are master watch designer. There's hundreds of watchmakers working for Siddiqui, and this design, this beautiful, it's called a vintage, is made of tantalum. Only 24 of them made. This is number 19, with a really interesting band, stretch band. Very,
and of course, a red band.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Siddiqui himself knew I would only wear it with a red band, and I think it looks beautiful, this black onyx style. It's a stunning piece. I've worn it around the world in the last 2 weeks. Everybody stops me and says, "What is that?" So Siddiqui started the conversation. He's certainly not ending it. This watch is going to make its way onto Shark Tank. They love it in wardrobe. I just think what the Siddiquis are doing is spectacular. I love the fact they support young, new watchmakers, and they bring them to the world and they showcase them. And of course, they service all the royal families in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and certainly in the UAE. I'm a huge fan. And other collectors have seen this. It's been on television on several US shows in the last few days. People just can't stop asking me about it. So sorry, Siddiqui, you're going to have to sell a lot more of these.
Of course, and we look forward to seeing that watch on the upcoming season of Shark Tank. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, thanks so much for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And now for a roundup on all of the major US political stories of the week, I'm joined by Republican strategist Amanda Makki. Thanks so much for your time, Amanda. First of all, I'd like to get your reaction on the news that 2 Israeli embassy staff have been shot dead leaving an event at the Capital Jewish Museum in Washington.
This is a huge tragedy. Of course, we are all stunned. I think this town is really grieving because it really hit close to home when it happens in our nation's capital. We have multiple police forces here, whether it's the Capitol Police, the U.S. Park Police, the Metro Police for Washington, D.C. And for this to happen so close to the Capitol, to two young individuals, it's just such a heinous thing that's happened. I think we're all just trying to grapple with this. It's horrific because it was done in the name of, a Hamas protester. I mean, in essence, that's what it was. And so it's really been tough for us to really understand all of this. But then you see it happening at commencement ceremonies, that they're continuing to chant this, free Palestine. And it's just really unnerving. And I think for this town in particular, we're all a little bit on edge that someone could come in such close proximity, and really execution style murder two young individuals.
You're in Washington. What is the mood like, and how are people reacting to the news?
I think people are just in shock. Again, like I said, with as much police presence as we have in a very small town like Washington, D.C., we just think, well, we're glad this happened a few blocks from the FBI building. So you had federal police presence very quickly on the scene, which is a good thing. But how did this happen? And I think that's the shock. It's a reception. It was a reception for peace, of all things. And it was a reception like many of the receptions that happen in Washington, D.C. every night when Congress is in town. Congress is about to leave, obviously, for the Memorial Day break, so they'll be gone all of next week. So I think everyone's just trying to wrap their head around, how did this happen? And why did this happen? And that's really the shocking part of all of this. We're going to have graduation ceremonies of the major universities in Washington, D.C. George Washington University, for example, does this on the Mall. There's no metal detectors there. I mean, these are very scary things for a small town, a political town like this to be grappling with right now. And of course, on the heels of Memorial Day weekend, where tens of thousands will pour into this city to honor those who served.
Moving on to President Biden, who obviously had very sad news this week in regards to his cancer diagnosis. What has the reaction been on the Hill?
Well, again, I think that there is a lot of people, there's a lot of shock that this was able to go on for as long as it was, and that it was covered up. I think that's the most the most hard thing to grapple with, is how his staff, his family, really his wife, allowed this to be covered up, and the American public to potentially re-elect a president who was in demise. I mean, we all saw it, we all knew it, but they kept pulling the wool over our eyes, if you will, and just saying that that's not the case, and he's healthy, he's in good spirits, just like anyone his age. It's not just like anyone his age. And what I don't understand is, I have a father who's a physician, and he struggles actually with these very same issue with prostate issues, and they check their PSA levels every year. How was it that he wasn't checking his PSA levels, and all of a sudden it's this major cancer that's spreading? I mean, that just seems very out of the ordinary.
There's been a new book out about President Biden called Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, its cover-up and his disastrous choice to run again, authored by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. It's raised concerns on how fit Biden was to be president. Is this any surprise to you?
Well, it's not a surprise. I don't think it's really a surprise to the American people. But what is surprising, and I think what Jake Tapper in particular is being called out on, was that he allowed this to happen, and he allowed for kind of a cover up, if you will. I mean, they did not ask the tough questions. And when reporters were in the White House asking the tough questions, they all pushed back, and they all said, these are bad reporters, and they're crazy. Why are they doing this? They're attacking him. They're not attacking him. They were seeing the physical and mental decline of a president. They were calling it like they saw it. And Jake Tapper and the likes of Jake Tapper in the liberal media were covering it up, to the point that Jake Tapper has even admitted he should have been probing more. He didn't do enough. And he in essence, covered up as a reporter and as much as a reporter could do. And of course, he's blaming it on the staff. Some of the staff are blaming it on the family, including the First Lady, Jill Biden. And so, everyone's just pointing fingers at this point. But the media absolutely should be to blame if they were not reporting on the mental and physical decline of a president who was up for reelection. It's different if he was term limited and he was not running for reelection. That would be different. But he was actively seeking this position up until July. It's amazing that they just covered this up because of their hatred for President Trump.
And political strategy has always been something that's deeply interested me. Even myself, I couldn't help think that the strategy around pushing Biden up until the very end, replacing him with Kamala Harris, not having a primary, they essentially left the door wide open for Trump.
Well, I think that they thought that Kamala Harris could, get enough funds. She was a woman of color. They really played the identity card game, thinking that identity politics is what this election was going to be about, when really it was about pushing back on the woke culture, the extremes we have in our culture right now, and the culture wars that they seemed to think, the Democrats seemed to think would help them. President Trump pushed back on that. He pushed back on immigration and making sure that the border would be secure. And he said he would strengthen our economy. And that's what people voted for. I think the biggest single issue was immigration. And what the Biden administration did was criminal. Up until December of 2024, we had 25 to 30,000 migrants coming through our borders a day. And the Trump administration quickly reversed course on that. And they have really gotten high marks from independents, Republicans, and Democrats on that issue. And that's what President Trump focused on, and Kamala Harris did not.
Moving on to South Africa, the world has been talking about this. There's been a meeting between South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and the US President Donald Trump. It ended with the president confronting the South African leader with a video of claims of white genocide in South Africa. What have you made of this row?
Well, I look at this as President Trump speaking up, giving a voice to the voiceless. And these are white farmers in South Africa where they are outnumbered, and they have been basically murdered. And these crosses and him showing the visual of this, kind of taking a little bit of the president by surprise, the president of South Africa by surprise doing this. But I think this is exactly why people voted for President Trump, because he's not a diplomat in any way, shape, or form, and doesn't want to be. He doesn't want to have glad handing and, backslapping. That's not who he is. He's going to take world leaders to task. He doesn't care. And that's where I think a lot of American people think that that's why they wanted to vote for him, because he was willing to do those things. And that's exactly what he did to the South African president yesterday. There are multiple speeches you can find online of the South African president saying that we need to take back our lands, we need to take them from those people. He is saying exactly what President Trump confronted him with. He gave a voice to the voiceless yesterday, and that was something that I think the world were taken by surprise, but it was a good thing for those who don't have a voice in South Africa, the white farmers.
President Donald Trump has said he's going to cut all future funding to South Africa over the allegations that it has been confiscating land, as he puts it, treating certain classes of people very badly.
Well, I think he's going to do everything that he can. I mean, certainly he's not in charge of South Africa, but if there's aid that they are giving our tax dollars to, he will certainly stop that. He's going to use every lever to make sure that he can do what he can to stop a genocide. And that's what he's going to do because he thinks it's the right thing. And again, I think President Trump has really stood for the American worker, and now he's standing for those who have been marginalized throughout the world. When their world leaders come to ask him for, business negotiations, to eliminate tariffs, whatever the issue might be, That's, I think, why, if you go back to the tariffs, why President Trump felt these are so important, because it gives him leverage. And if it gives him leverage to stop a genocide from happening in South Africa, he's going to use it.
Moving on to tax and what Trump has called his big, beautiful bill. The US House of Representatives has passed a wide-ranging tax bill backed by President Trump. It still needs the Senate approval. What's your reaction?
Well, this is, I think, kudos to the Speaker Mike Johnson, for really being able to push through a very challenging tax bill that, you know, the majority is so slim of Republicans. It passed by one vote. This is like miraculous type work that the Speaker of the House was able to pull off. But, you know, we were butting up against a Memorial Day recess. That's always an incentive for people to want to get out of town. So I think these members of Congress held out as long as they could. The uber conservatives held out as long as they could. But President Trump came in and he lobbied. And that lobbying effort really paid off. And so here we are with a bill that has passed in the House. It goes to the Senate now, and I don't think anyone doubts that the Senate will pass it, likely before the August recess, the next big recess that will be 5 weeks long.
How concerned are you about the US economy? The Democrats are saying it's going to cost working families absolute millions.
It's actually not. It's going to help middle class, upper class, and the low-income individuals in this country. I think what they're focused on are Medicaid requirements. And for those of you who don't know what Medicaid is, it's basically a government insurance program for the needy and the poor. The Democrats over the years had expanded this program significantly under Obamacare, and this was a way to rein that in. So I think the Democrats are targeting that Medicaid is being reined in, which it should be. Medicaid is not meant for people to stay on Medicaid for the rest of their lives. There are work requirements now that come into place sooner. In other words, we expect you to go back to work, and that's by the end of 2026. And that's why you saw the House Democrat leader, Hakeem Jeffries, he really didn't put up a fight on this bill. They didn't vote for it, but they didn't put up a fight either, because the tax cuts do actually help millions of Americans in all tax brackets.
Donald Trump, in a social media post, has called it arguably the most significant piece of legislation that will ever be signed in the history of the country. What's your take on that?
Well, the no tax on tips, for example, that's something new. They've also created incentive programs to put money away for your child's future. And so there are some new things in this, but also the tax extenders that help businesses, that help small business owners, the tax cuts that stay in place, the highest bracket at 37%. These are all just things that are common, make sense things. And I think President Trump's view is they've been in place since 2017 when this bill was originally enacted, and they'll go into, for the next 10 years. And he's very proud of that accomplishment, as he should be. So, again, kudos to Speaker Mike Johnson for everything that he was able to accomplish with the slimmest of majorities. This bill passed by one vote.
Amanda Makki, Republican strategist, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for on Global News Today. Thanks for watching.